if I don't get a chance to say this later, it's an honor to be here with your other fine writers, and I'm looking forward to hearing you all.
Absolutely.
Same.
Thank you. Thank you, Kagiso. Yeah, no, I think, as I said, I read everyone's works, and wow, it's going to be a great event today. I'm very excited. So thank you again for joining us. It's going to be a great night, a great day. So Catherine just said she'll type a good to go when we're ready. So. Do people have plans for the weekend?
Not really. My plans are my usual COVID plans, which is stay home.
Yeah, I hear you.
Anything.
It's our anniversary, but same thing. Like,
oh, happy anniversary!
That's great. Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of pride events going on virtually, of course. So there's things that people can tune into if you've got the time. So.
And a lot of us have the time right now.
Very true. Very true. Kagiso, I heard that you had an event with Emma Donahue. That sounds pretty amazing.
Yeah, I interviewed her for, I was sitting right here actually, The Pull of the Stars.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, it was a great discussion. It was interesting how much I could link it to her other books. And at first I was a little nervous thinking, maybe I'm making a link that doesn't really exist. And she was saying, yep. I mean, I don't know if you guys have read Room, but I was saying to her that it feels like she just has she'll confine us to the space within her work a lot of the time. And she said, yeah, I do have a bad habit of doing that. you read her work and you feel like, are we in Room again? But yeah, it was a great discussion.
Oh, that's amazing. And Amanda, I was seeing on your Facebook that you're in the works, you're writing a new work. So that's exciting.
I am. Yes, I'm actually in my neighbor's house right now because she's gone for a few months. And so she's like, well, it's right next door. Do you want the house for a little while? Which is great because we are 6 people in my house. So I've been coming here every day to write / do events and everything else because there's no one else here. It's such a treat when you have 4 kids to like have nobody else around, right?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's like a writer's retreat.
What's that?
It's like you have a free writer's retreat.
I do, and right next door. I go next door, I make myself a latte, I come back. Amazing.
I'm so envious.
Come work on the back deck.
I have 2 kids, so I totally get it. Yeah, that's really lucky.
And our kids are lovely. They're older now too. They're all like teenagers, young adults, but they all still live at home. And we don't have a big home, and so like they're always sort of everywhere. It's hard because you want to get in the zone and write something really heavy, and it's and it's like, oh hey mom, I need a ride at the store, or hey mom, I just need to talk to you about something. Well, you know what it's like, right? It's like it's a lot.
Yeah,
no
that's
kidding.
lucky.
Nathan, are you working on anything new? Oh,
sorry, wrong. I just tried to share my screen instead of unmuting. I've got 2 novellas in the pipeline. My really gregarious husky blew my tendons just before COVID hit. in my left arm. And so I was doing physiotherapy, and then I couldn't do physiotherapy because everything shut down. So it's only now I'm starting to be able to type again.
Oh my goodness.
That was fun.
Wow.
You know what's funny, Nathan? I thought that was the title of a book. I was like, oh, that's kind of my really gregarious husky flew attendant.
It could be the title of a book.
That's unique.
It's a fun title. So we're beginning, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it's 2, so I guess we're good to go. So I want to thank everyone and say good afternoon and happy Pride Ottawa. My name is Glenn Crawford. It's an honor to be able to host this exciting literary event in partnership with the Ottawa Senior Pride Network and Capital Pride, because reading is what? Fundamental. First of all, I want to congratulate Capital Pride for all the work they have done to provide an amazing array of online activities during this most challenging of years. Staying connected and celebrating community is now more important than ever, as we do our best to stay safe and sane while remaining together apart wherever we are. It's so important to have all of these activities and resources available to us by our community and for our community. Please reach out to whomever you know who could use a hand, or just a simple chat and a check-in from time to time. Small acts of kindness can do so much for the most vulnerable among us. Thank you to Osmel, Catherine, and the entire Capital Pride team for giving us this space here today and to share the power of reading with you all. Before we get started, I would like to say a few short words about the Ottawa Senior Pride Network, or as many people know, it's OSPN for short. For those who may not be familiar with us, we're a volunteer-run network of 2S LGBTQ+ seniors, 50 and over, and our allies, which was formed in 2008. Our group includes a number of queer seniors who have a history of decades of activism and community development work, including forming many of our community's existing organizations and groups. We connect through our email distribution system, which you can sign up for through our bilingual website at ospn.rfao.ca, as well as a very active Facebook group. In recent months, we've been offering a wide variety of online programming, which it's my honor to be able to provide that, which includes meditation sessions, weekly movie nights, a coffee club, virtual dances, yoga, and very special events like this one today. While we gear things to a senior audience, most of our activities could certainly be enjoyed by queers of all ages. You can learn about our regular and feature online events on our website, on our mailing list, or you can contact me at ospn.programming@gmail.com. We'd love to see you get involved and participate, so check us out or help us spread the word about all we're doing. For today, we've invited 4 talented local queer authors, Nathan Burgoine, Gabriella Goliger, Amanda Jetté Knox, and Kagiso Lesego Molope, to read from their diverse writings. And once they've each had a chance to enthrall you all with their captivating work, we'll open up to a panel discussion on the importance of queer literature, diversity, and community. I'll be keeping an eye on the Zoom chat, so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to type them to us and we'll do our best to get to all of them, time permitting. And if you're watching us on YouTube, Catherine from Capital Pride will be able to forward any questions you write my way. So first of all, I'm honored to introduce our first author to read from her work, Kagiso Lesego Molope, who was born and educated in South Africa. Her novel, Dancing in the Dust, was on the IBI Honored List for 2006. Her second novel, The Mending Season, was chosen to be on the school curriculum in South Africa. This book, Betrays My Brother, was awarded the Percy Fitzpatrick Prize by the English Academy of Southern Africa, where it was first published. Her latest novel is Such a Lonely, Lovely Road, which is a beautiful and heartfelt story of forbidden love between 2 men in the time of the HIV epidemic in South Africa. She lives in Ottawa, so please welcome Kagiso. So Kagiso, I'll just get you to unmute your mic.
Thank you. And thank you for having us. I'm just going to read about half a page from Such a Lonely, Lovely Road. When I put my palm on it, the skin under his t-shirt was smooth and warm. He was brushing his lips against my bare shoulder when I pulled his shirt up, and I stopped before it was all off, letting him kiss me some more, my body moving to the rhythm of the mood. I'd never seen his whole body so bare and so close, yet whatever part I touched, held, or moved my lips against felt familiar. Still, what we were doing, my teeth on his skin, his palm around my erection, was different from what I'd imagined in the many moments alone in my room at UCT, or here in my bed when I could think of him without the guilt and old shame. Every time I'd imagined something hurried and clumsy, but this was nothing like that. Our lovemaking was slow and rhythmic, steady but uncontrolled. Sidiba's movements on top of me, while charged, were graceful. He had always had a powerful body and moved in it with confidence and deliberate, incredible skill. By then, I thought of myself as a good lover, or at least impressive enough. For me, it was all about demonstrating your competence, showing off, and letting your lover see what you were good at. Sidiba was different, had a different idea of it. With him, lovemaking mimicked the back and forth of a good conversation. He was interested in how I felt, what I wanted, the kind of lover who appreciated a response. And I found out that that was an intoxicating and wildly erotic thing, making love with someone who wants to look at you. I slipped away from everything I had known until then, my world suddenly making sense. Inside, I was falling into a more peaceful place, a place I had spent years looking to find. That night, we were in bed for hours, kissing, caressing different parts of each other, slowly discovering, learning what the other wanted, and then resuming our lovemaking. By the time the sun came up, I was both achy and relaxed, wanting more and already regretting that he had to leave. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant. That was so beautiful. I absolutely loved your novel, and I definitely will be picking up more of your work because I just thought it was so beautiful and so true. You know, it just felt very real to me when I read it. So I want to thank you so much for participating today.
Thank you.
So I do have one comment here from Glenn Nudio, who said, hello, and it's a great event and thanks for organizing it. So Glenn, we're happy to have you here today. And Julie wanted to make a note to ask Gabriella if she wanted to let you know that she's here and she has a appointment. And what's good news, Julie, is Gabriella is next. So I'll introduce her now. Our next author is Gabriella Goliger, whose novel Girl Unwrapped won the Ottawa Book Award for 2011. Set in Montreal in the 1950s and 60s, it's a coming-of-age story about a girl whose budding lesbian desires clash with the mores of her times and the expectations of her Holocaust-scarred parents. Gabriella's first book, Song of Ascent, won the 2001 Upper Canada Writers' Craft Award. Her latest novel is Ava Solomon's War, which garnered praise from the renowned Canadian authors Joan Thomas and Frances Atani. Gabriella was co-winner of the 1997 Journey Prize for Short Fiction, was a finalist for this prize in 1995, and won the Prism International Award in 1993. She's also been published in a number of journals and anthologies, including The Best New American Voices, 2000, and Contemporary Jewish Writing in Canada. Born in Italy, Gabriella grew up in Montreal and also lived in Jerusalem, the Eastern Arctic, Victoria, BC, and Ottawa, her longtime and permanent home. In the 1980s and early 90s, Gabriella was active in Ottawa's 2S LGBTQ+ community as editor of the community newspaper, volunteer on the Gay Line, and co-founder of the Women's Coming Out discussion group. She's been with her partner, Barbara Freeman, since 1981. So Barbara, I'll get you to unmute your mic and you're ready to go.
Thank you. I am going to read from Girl Unwrapped, as Glenn mentioned, and I'm going to read a longer excerpt as we were invited to read a little longer. So I hope you'll enjoy it and bear with me. So as Glenn said, Girl Unwrapped is a coming of age and a coming out novel, and it's set in Montreal in the 1960s. And that's a time before gay liberation. In those days, the gay scene was hidden away, often literally underground in basements, and still subject to police raids. Now, the main character of my novel is Tony Goldblatt, and in the excerpt I'm going to read, Tony is 17. She's never met another lesbian before, but she's just found out about a bar called Lulu's, and she's trying to screw up her courage to check it out. Tony trots back and forth, casting quick glances at the door that will lead her to happiness or perdition. It's on a lower level, half hidden by a long flight of outdoor stairs. The sign above is so discreet, it's easy to miss, spelling out Lulu's Lounge in faint, flickering blue neon. If you weren't looking for that sign, you'd be sure to miss it. And even now, it seems like a mirage. Tony has lingered on the corner and wandered around the neighborhood and frozen her butt for almost half an hour. The evening is slipping by, and still she can't make her move. She watches as several couples arrive, knock, are admitted, while a brief gust of chatter and music blows into the street. Then silence once more, blank walls and a dark closed door. Finally, numb of toe, trembling of limb, Tony scoots across the road and into the gloom beneath the outdoor staircase. Shortly afterwards, she hears footsteps, someone striding down the street who stops just inches away from Tony's hiding place and stands in the ghostly pool of light cast by the neon sign. It's a woman with dark, handsome features, long, strong face, hawk's beak nose, conquistador's mouth, thick eyebrows. Her hair is cut in a short, masculine bob, and she wears a black leather jacket that gives extra heft to her square shoulders. If she's noticed Tony, she pays no attention, but instead whisks out a comb from her back pocket and rakes it along the sides of her head. One hand combs, the other smooths in quick, self-assured movements. On the pinky finger of one of those powerful hands, a gold ring flashes. Tony holds her breath, weak with excitement. She's aware that had she seen this manly woman on St. Catherine's Street an hour ago, she might have thought her freakish and averted her eyes. But now, suddenly, perhaps because of the place and time and the gesture with the comb, Tony sees something new, the compelling appeal of ambiguity. It's a face that breaks the rules. The woman draws herself up, trots down the steps, and raps a smart tattoo on the door. Ben, Juanita, c'est toi. A deep, heavily accented voice booms out. About time, get your ass in here. Your gang's waiting. Again, from inside, banners of carefree noise issue forth, clinking glasses, laughter, and dance music, and are abruptly cut off when the door slams shut. Tony's heart thunders against her ribcage. Perhaps beyond this threshold, an underground of toughs, gangsters, and freaks awaits. Army boots and switchblades and bearded ladies. Perhaps she's arrived at the gates of hell, but she must go forward. She hurls herself at the door, pounds with her fist. The door opens a crack, and a pair of eyes sweep up and down her like a policeman's flashlight, taking Tony's measure. Why? Says the same husky voice that greeted Juanita. And when Tony just stares, you look for someone? May I come in? Tony breathes. The door opens a touch wider. The person behind the voice leans forward into the gap. In the dim glow of the entranceway, Tony makes out a tall, hefty build, a broad face, a squashed-in nose, a thatch of straw-colored hair tumbled over the brow. Shrewd lines crinkle the corners of the eyes. How old are you, kid? 18, Tony answers. Tell me another. Anyway, even if 18, you're underage for this établissement, and you're wearing jeans. I have a dress code, no jeans. I didn't know. Tony swallows down the sob rising in her throat. She notices now that her interrogator wears wine red slacks, white loafers, and a gaily patterned shirt with the sleeves rolled up. There's a heavy gold chain around her neck and another on her wrist. And these look more like weapons than jewelry. Tough luck, the woman snorts as the door begins to close. But Tony's foot juts forward of its own accord, wedging itself against the jamb. But I'm a friend of Juanita's. The words have come out of nowhere. Eh? That's so? The woman sounds doubtful. Nevertheless, she turns and shouts, Hey, Juanita, Mawenzi. Someone here says she knows you. Ever lay eyes on this kid before? The Spanish-featured woman appears in the doorway. She has shed her leather jacket and now stands before Tony in a man's suit, solid black, the pant legs pressed into razor-edge creases. She regards Tony blank-eyed, stone-faced, and Tony can only look back at her in trembling silence. Sure, I know her. This one's trouble, Juanita finally declares in a slow, firm voice. Thought so, says the doorkeeper, crossing her arms over her chest. She has biceps as big as Tony's knees. But I'll keep her in line. She'll answer to me. Give her a break, Rick. Juanita still doesn't crack a smile, though a twinkle has come into those obsidian eyes. Eh ben, it's cold standing here. Come in if you're coming. The door swings open. Tony's in. Hand clamped on her shoulder, Juanita steers Tony through a long, narrow, crowded room with dark painted walls and wreaths of smoke snaking up towards the ceiling. There's a bar on one side, a small, scuffed up dance floor beside a jukebox, and a few tables at the back, where Juanita's friends sit waiting. Hey, gals, look what the cat delivered. Fresh meat. Okay, this here's Maggie. That's Rhonda and Renee. Me you know already, right? So what's your name? Tony tells them. A first-timer, gals, fresh from her mommy's tits. Course I know. Saw you shivering under the stairs with your eyes big as hubcaps. Welcome to our den of iniquity. Juanita bends in a mocking bow. Come sit in my lap, honey, Maggie says, winking and patting her knees. She's a chunky, older woman, 40 at least, with short, curly, muddy brown hair. She's wearing a tartan blazer with brass buttons and a lapel pin that's halfway between a cross and a dagger. Don't trust Juanita, she's an animal. But I don't bite, not unless you ask nicely, har har. Poor kid, she doesn't know what to make of us. She's going to faint or run screaming out the door. No, I won't, Tony mutters, but sidles away from Maggie into an empty chair near the other two, Rhonda and Renee, who sit pressed close together like lovebirds on a wire. Rhonda, who's clearly the guy of the couple, though she's baby-faced and skinny, extends a hand. The grip is surprisingly firm. Her sweetheart ignores Tony. Renee is tiny and ultra-feminine, wearing a low-cut cocktail dress that shows off the tops of voluptuous breasts, but also a knobby hump at the summit of her spine. She hunches at the table, a cigarette balanced between white fingers that end in scarlet nails so long they curve inward. Tony can just imagine her mother's hissed verdict. Grotesque. So, am I right? Juanita asks. Scared shitless? If I was, I wouldn't tell you, Tony answers, trying to keep the quaver from her voice. This earns her a burst of friendly guffaws. Soon she's clutching a beer, puffing a fag, and gazing eagerly around the room. A truth slams down upon her mind like a pot lid finding its pot. Every last soul here is female. The fact is no less remarkable for being obvious. Some faces are plain, some attractive, and a few are heart-stoppingly beautiful. Tony finds herself seeking out those special faces. Their loveliness strikes her as especially poignant here in this warm, smoky room, sealed off from the outside world. Her senses keenly alive, she thinks she might be turning into the kind of animal Maggie alluded to. But she has no regrets. And this transformation has happened almost instantly, as if the air at Lulu's were a secret, powerful potion that made you anew. Thank you.
Oh, Gabriella, that was such a powerful reading. And I remember that scene very vividly in the book. It was, I think it brings back a lot of memories for anyone who's dared to enter, whether it's a bar or a community group or anything for the first time, whether, you know, I mean, now probably kids 11, 12 going to gay straight alliances in their school, you know, is maybe the closest parallel, but it was very evocative of the time, and I thought it was wonderful. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. So our third author today is Nathan Burgoine, who grew up as a reader and studied literature in university while making a living as a bookseller. His first published short story was Heart in the collection Fool for Love, New Gay Fiction. Since then, he has had dozens of short stories published and released his first collection of short fiction, of Echoes Born, from Bold Strokes Books. Despite short fiction being his favorite, he's also written multiple novellas and 3 novels, the first of which, Light, was a finalist for a Lambda Literary Award. His most recent novel, a contemporary speculative fiction young adult book, Exit Plans for Teenage Freaks, which is a great title, was a finalist for the Pre-Aurora Award. He lives with his husband, Daniel, and their rescued husky, Max, who apparently is pretty dangerous, in Ottawa, Canada, where socialized healthcare and gay marriage have yet to cause the sky to cave in. So welcome, Nathan.
Hello, thank you. Yeah, I was explaining to the authors earlier that my dog did some damage to my tendons, which is why I haven't been writing recently. But I'm going to read from my short story collection of Echoes Born, which is more or less my love letter to the village here in Ottawa, and what it was like very much when I first came out. But specifically, I'm reading from a story called A Little Village Magic. Most of my stuff tends to have just a dash of something magic or psychic or other involved. This is no different. And the scene in question is there's a mural in the village that has been defaced. And so the local groups have hired someone to paint over it in white, and they're going to make a new mural. And a young man, Gabe, is watching from the store of a little new age shop where he works at the painter, and has been staring at the painter for a little bit now because the painter is quite attractive. And his boss comes in and catches him staring. It'd be easier to ask him out if you introduced yourself to him. Gabe jumped and turned away from the window. He could feel his face turning crimson, but feigned nonchalance. Pardon? Bailey just laughed. Aw, sweetie, got a bit of a crush? It shows. Bailey didn't laugh a second time, which he appreciated. Sometimes he wondered if the name of her shop, Third Eye, was a bit autobiographical, or maybe he was just transparent. Well, Bailey said, looking where Gabe had been staring a few moments earlier, he certainly has nice shoulders. Yep, Gabe joined her. Do you have one of your nonsense spells that makes guys with nice arms notice guys with, he faltered. Good souls, she said. Thanks, the best I was coming up with was a great GPA. Bailey shoved his shoulder. You are more than your GPA. Well, tell that to the scholarship people, Gabe said. Then they turned back to watch, tilting their heads to get the right viewing angle. He'd been there 2 days in a row, and as far as Gabe could tell, he was cleaning the mural site. He'd coated the wall twice with white paint, and as the day had grown to be one of the first really warm days of the year, he'd shucked his shirt. At that point, Gabe had lost all will to resist watching the painter as he went up and down the ladder, which apparently was obvious. First, Bailey said, it's not nonsense. Gabe gave her a rueful smile. And second, the best spell in the world is just to say hello. If you say so. The little bell over the door rang and they both turned. What are we looking at? The woman who'd just arrived was older and had obvious taste. She wore peach-colored blouse and classy touches of understated gold jewelry, including a lovely pendant that looked like a small leaf dipped in gold. She used a hand-carved wooden cane and walked with the confidence of someone who was refusing to slow down. Gabe's crushing on the painter, Bailey said. Hello, Marion, Gabe said. It still felt a little weird to call the older woman by her first name, but she'd insisted after the first time they'd met. She was a regular in the village and one of his favorite people. Bailey had introduced them, surprising Gabe by telling Marion right off that he was a fellow cast-off. He hadn't known what that meant at first, but Marion had cleared it up for him with her usual blunt honesty. Oh, my parents were like that too. Hell with them. Welcome to your new family. He'd fallen in love with her on the spot. Most of the people in the village called her Mother Marion. Too butch for me, Marion said, peering through the window at the painter. I heard about the mural, she frowned. Assholes. Do they know who did it? Gabe asked. Marion shook her head. No one saw. It got vandalized overnight. I didn't hear anything, Bailey said. Like many of the businesses in the village, Third Eye had 2 apartments overhead. She and her husband lived in one. Are they going to put the names back? Gabe asked. Marion smiled at him. I hope so. It occurred to Gabe that for Marion, many of those names were people who lived and breathed in her lifetime. Why don't you go ask them? Bailey said. Then you could introduce yourself. Yeah, right. Well, would you? Marion said. Gabe froze, turning to look at her. Oh no. He said. It would be a load off my mind, Marion said. She leaned heavily on her cane and looked over her glasses at him. You know, my dear Chantal was on that wall. Oh, crap. Chantal was Marion's late wife. What was he supposed to say to this? Gabe squirmed. Okay. He coughed and looked at Bailey. I'll be right back. He tried not to glare at her. Wait, Bailey said. You need some bling. Gabe gritted his teeth while Bailey went to the jewelry case. He was wearing a white t-shirt and a pair of comfortable jeans, and there was no bling in the world that was going to make him look like anything other than the boring, lanky nerd with poofy black hair that he was. She came back with a thin silver necklace and square of dark gray metallic stone on it. She undid the clasp and put it around his neck, leaning over him. There, you look great. It took all his willpower not to stick his tongue out at her. I'll wait right here, Marion said. Was it just Gabe, or was her voice wavering? I could use the rest. Gabe nodded, smiled tightly at both of them, and left the store. Marion snickered. That boy looks like he's going to pass out. You were a little over the top there, Bailey said. I could use a rest? Really? Since when? Over the top was that necklace. Pardon? Bailey's eyes widened, the picture of innocence. Oh dear, when you first opened this place, you gave me something just like it. I told you I felt foolish going on a first date at my age. You said it would create confidence and opportunity. The grand dame of the village leaned forward. I ran into her so often, I felt like a stalker. That lady and I were together for 10 wonderful years, and I've been thanking you ever since. So don't you tell me you did not give that young boy the same stone. It's hematite, Bailey said, and don't say anything to him. He doesn't really believe. If I didn't know better, Marion said, narrowing her eyes, I'd say you were meddling in love lives again. Do you want to watch through the window? Who do you take me for? Marion rolled her eyes. Of course I do. I'll stop there.
Nathan, your book was so much fun. I really enjoyed it. And, you know, I was quite touched actually, because I don't know if you know this, but I was one of the volunteers who helped establish the village in Ottawa. So reading the stories, you know, meant a lot to me personally, as well as of course, just enjoying them. And I'd also read Gabriella's collection of short stories, Song of Ascent, and I found there was an interesting parallel because Gabriella's work was also a collection of short stories, and they were sort of tied together by you know, sort of different family members. It sort of follows different family members over time, and sort of tells little sort of vignettes of their life. And I thought what was interesting about your book was that it was sort of similar in that it was, you know, it was sort of our chosen family and the people within the village and different stories that were sort of interconnected in different ways. And of course, there was the mystical aspect as well. So it was a lot of fun. So thank you so much for reading with us today. So now I'll introduce our fourth and final author, who is Amanda Jetté Knox. She's an award-winning writer and 2S LGBTQ+ advocate with a focus on families and mental health. She's the best-selling author of the memoir Love Lives Here, a story of thriving in a transgender family, which was both a CBC Canada Reads long list contender and one of Indigo's best books of 2019. She lives in Ottawa with her wife and 4 children and a coffee maker that never quits.
True story, true story. Oh, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, the problem with going last is like I heard everyone else's stuff and I'm like second guessing what I'm reading now because all your works are wonderful. Wow, I just could listen to you read all day. So my book is a little different because it is a memoir. So for those who don't know us, we are a family that has a non-binary kiddo who came out in 2014. And a year and a half after that, my partner, who I was married to at the time for 18 years, came out as a trans woman. And a little bit after that, I was able to finally come out myself because I was also in my own closet as a lesbian. So there are a lot of different elements to our story. I mean, there's a lot there, but I thought I would sort of take it a little lighter. There's a lot of heavy moments in my book. So I'm going to go through a conversation where my wife has just come out to me a couple of days before, and things are still pretty raw. And I'm trying to be supportive. I'm still like wrestling with this idea, like, wow, you know, this like life is changing again. And we're taking a walk. We are going for a walk, and we're still not sure where we're going in our relationship, but we're definitely, you know, I've got her back in terms of supporting her in her transition. So we are discussing a name. Towards the end, I'm going to switch to her voice because part of what was done in this book is it's written a lot from my perspective, but also written from my partner's perspective as well, with a lot of her input. So it's sort of, it isn't just my voice. All right. So if you're transitioning, I guess you need a name, I said, as we walked under a patch of trees. Have any ideas? Well, a few, she smiled. Lay them on me, I said. I'm ready. I was thinking of Suki, she said. I laughed. She didn't. What? I asked. No, seriously? You're kidding me right now. What's wrong with Suki? She countered. What isn't wrong with Suki? It sounds like a 15-year-old's name. Why is this your first choice? So much for being non-judgmental Amanda, here for you every step of the way. Apparently, I draw the line at names. There was a girl in my high school named, she began. Exactly my point, I said. That time we both laughed. I veto Suki. Wait, she said. You can veto my names? A false look of shock crossed her face. I can. It's in our vows, I said. We came to a marshy area and stood watching jolly toddlers feed ducks. What about Michelle? She asked. Oh, no. I can't be married to a Michelle, I said matter-of-factly. Why not? I could totally see myself as a Michelle. 90% of Michelles I've known have been total bitches, I explained. That can't be true, she said. There are statistically far too many Michelles for them all to be terrible people. Not all, I countered, rolling my eyes for dramatic effect. Just most. Like the girl who used to punch me in high school, or the one at the house I was living in on Gloucester. She used to eat all my cheese and deny it. That's only 2, she said. Look, every time I say your name, I'm going to remember face puncher Michelle or cheese stealer Michelle and sneer a little. Is that what you want? Do you want me to sneer when I introduce you to people? You should meet more Michelles, she said. You need some kind of exposure therapy. That exposure therapy, I said, should not begin at home. Okay, picky one, she said, making a grand theatrical gesture with her arms. What do you think I should name myself? I don't really care, I replied. She gave me the finger. Okay, I do care, but not as much as you might think. Just not Suki or Michelle. Oh, and could you try and stay away from A names? We already have Amanda, Alexis, Eric with an A. Poor Jackson will feel pretty left out. Finally, a legitimate veto, she thought for a moment. How about Zoe? I love the name Zoe, I said. The aunt of my childhood friend Annie had that name. She lived out west and used to come visit from time to time. I was always taken by her style, attitude, and sense of adventure. Unlike her sisters who'd stayed local, she had gone off to build a life for herself on the other side of the country. And from my young vantage point, she always seemed to come back with more self-assuredness than she'd had the last time. Zoe was a perfect name to start anew. I like it too, she replied. And it's the furthest thing from an A name. We high-fived. A few toddlers looked up at us. It suits you, Zoe, I said, smiling. We turned and made our way back to the car, just me and Zoe, and I reached for her hand. It surprised both of us, but it also felt right. I had held this hand for over 2 decades, but with relationship changes on the horizon, this might be one of the last times. The conflicting feelings of rightness and wrongness created a tug-of-war in my chest. I took a breath and focused on what was in front of me, what I knew for certain. Zoe. I had a wife named Zoe. Zoe. The girl from Peterborough had a name now, a real name that rolled off the tongue and felt right in a way that in a way her given name never had. For so long, she had hidden from the world, vowing never to step outside her cocoon. Now, awake and aware on a sunny July day, she could almost hear her name carried on the breeze. She had so much still to do and so many fears to overcome. But this day, in this moment, she was choosing to push forward and live. She hadn't always wanted to live. Once, years before, she had run out into a snowstorm, bootless, coatless, away from a late-night argument and her wife's insistence that she tell her what was wrong. She had almost spoken the words, "I'm not a man," out loud, and the proximity of that truth was too much for her. So she ran, leaving the door wide open, tears streaming down her face, hoping to outrun the woman inside her as she had once tried to outrun the girl within. She wanted to run far and fast, to freeze in the frigid Canadian landscape, to die of exposure, to fall peacefully and permanently asleep, to never come home. She could hear her name, the man's name that didn't fit, being shouted from the doorway, almost lost in the howling wind. Eric was a preschooler at the time, and in that moment, Zoe believed he would be better off without someone who could never truly be a father to him. She believed her young wife would be better off meeting someone new, someone less broken to build a life with. She didn't want to be alive in this prison she had built for herself, the one society had insisted would bring her joy. Reason got the better of her, and she returned home before frostbite set in. I stood at the door with tears in my eyes. I was so worried about you. Why did you do that? We need you. The next day, she tried to resume a normal life. Denial slowly buried the truth. It would take many more years and a talk in a parking lot to start to feel right. Zoe, the most powerful 2 syllables she had ever spoken. She could finally be the girl she always knew she was. Zoe, holding her wife's hand in the sun. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was great. What I loved about your book was how well it was written in a very sort of accessible way. You know, I think you, as you mentioned in your sort of introduction before you started reading, you have certainly gone through a lot of different painful, difficult experiences, and also a lot of changes in your family life. And so I think you know, for a lot of people, it's new to them. It's maybe a bit hard to understand. And I thought the way that you wrote it was so you know, true. It was clear that it was almost like you were talking to the reader, right? Like in person. It had that sort of feel to it. And I loved that you incorporated you know, your wife's voice as well, and her perspective going through it. So I thought it was wonderful. And thank you again to all of our readers for such amazing readings today. Just reading a couple comments before we get started into the panel discussion. Karen, who's watching from Victoria, which is exciting. She said, great event, big thanks for organizing it, which has absolutely been my pleasure. And AJ said, a fantastic reading by all 4 authors. And I'm sure everyone who's been watching, whether it's in Zoom or on the YouTube live stream would feel the same way. So I also hope that all of the viewers will want to run out and buy copies of your books. And I'll be sharing details about the works that you read from and where folks can buy them at the end of the event. So please do stay until the end to get all of that information. So if everyone's ready, I'm going to open up this discussion with a few questions I prepared for you. And then, of course, again, if other people have questions for you, I'll be monitoring the chat and raise them as well. So I did want to, as I say, since I've read all of your books, I'm hoping to talk about themes that seem to run through them, even though obviously you're writing from different perspectives and have quite different writing styles. So the first question I want to ask was, as a writer, how do you think being from the queer community can influence your writing, whether it's the themes or just your voice, your perspective? And that's open for anyone to to answer.
So I think for me, being queer has meant that, you know, a lot of my life has been about, because I was closeted for so long, it was about observing. I observed people, how they behaved, what sort of more typical, or I hate to use the term normal, but you know, what that life looked like for people. I tried really hard to emulate that life for a long time. I talk a lot about that in my book, and how having sort of been bullied, and part of that bullying was because people were picking up on my sexual orientation, you know, how that really forced me to sort of pretend. And so when I write, especially when I'm writing fiction, but also in part when I'm writing nonfiction, but definitely it gives me, I can get into people's heads a lot easier, I think, in that sense. I think that's really been helpful to me. You sort of being a watcher of people, and also just being out. You also, unfortunately, in this day and age, and even here in Ottawa, you sort of have to keep an eye out sometimes, right? I mean, there's still a lot of bigotry out there, and when my wife and I hold hands, or we, whatever we're doing, we're always a little extra mindful, and so you observe, and when you observe, that can really help you as a writer. I think that's one of my big sort of unorthodox takeaways from that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think you're right that when you are sort of from the outside, you have sort of a perspective in a way. Before we come out, we've got that kind of persona that we put on to fit in, and it's maybe gives us good observational qualities as well. Does Kagiso, did you have something to say? I noticed you unmuted.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to the observer point. When I wrote Such a Lonely Lovely Road, what really led to it was that I was at the time doing my undergrad thesis on queer spaces in South Africa. So my background is very different from everyone because I'm South African born and raised, and the books that I write are about the communities there. So what was really interesting for me about this was that I was growing up in a really segregated place because it was apartheid. And I found out about these queer spaces that existed far and hidden away from, what would have been considered normal in the country, where Black and white queer men met, these very private spaces where they would actually interact, where there would be relationships formed, but they were very secret. And so I was really intrigued by the fact that people looking for love could go to such great lengths to find it in a place where it was a lot of the time quite dangerous to be seen together. But it was sort of this double outsider thing, right? Where you are not supposed to be queer, but also you are not supposed to interact with people of different colors. So I was really intrigued by the fact that these spaces existed at all. When we couldn't sit at the coffee shop, I mean, we were forbidden from sitting in the same coffee shops, right? Like, or going to the same beaches. There were all these whites only, blacks only signs all over. And it was just so intriguing to me that these men and women were finding spaces in which there were no signs, there were no blacks only, there were no whites only signs, and that we as people can find ways to be ourselves, and create spaces where we can be fully ourselves, and go against what the laws say, what the rules say, and say, I will find a way to find love, to find companionship, to have sex, to do whatever I want with myself and my body. And so it's very interesting to me to hear everybody else's stories where, I think there's you're writing about open queer spaces to an extent, right? They can never be fully open at different times, but these were just non-existent. I mean, I just found out about them by chance, and it was such a shock to me that, in the South Africa that I grew up in, if I was seen walking with a white person, people would come up to us and say, how do you know each other? Where did you meet? How are you? Are you their maid's daughter? Or we were walking down the street, we would get stopped all the time. So it was really exciting for me. And I was very curious about those spaces. And I wrote the book because I wanted to talk about the complexities of those spaces and the fact that, he finds love. He's a Black man who finds love with another Black man who comes from the same place that he comes from. And just the fact that it was so rare that people could find love with people they feel at home with, and that in those spaces, Black and white people were meeting, but feeling very, they were the product of the society. So there was a lot of conflict within those spaces. There was a lot of racism. There was a lot of inability to meet on these different levels because we were educated that we didn't belong together. So how does that affect my writing? I like the idea that we can have happy endings as that, we can choose our ways of living and our ways of loving, and defy the odds. Yeah. And so that's a theme that sort of runs through a lot of my books, that we don't have to live by the rules.
Would you say in your experience when you were there, that was not necessarily the norm, that this is almost sort of a hopeful future as opposed to the reality of what people are living at the time, or at the time that the novel is set in?
Yeah, I think it felt risky to even come out as queer. I mean, one of the main themes is that it's, a lot of governments on the continent have they have banned being queer, and they've called it un-African. And that was part of the story here, is to say, what is and what isn't African, and who gets to say that. And so for me, it felt powerful to have two African men who were pillars of the community in all these different ways. And it's sort of challenging the community to say, tell me that I'm not African. When you depend on me as your doctor, when you depend on me as your hairdresser, tell me that I'm not African, and that, it was very important to me to say, to kind of challenge those views. I could have had one of the men be white, and I didn't want to do that, because I thought I wanted to say this is as African as my skin. I wanted to make that point. And I think, like Nathan said earlier, these are love letters. I think we are writing love letters to different communities, because people are living in places where they're being told they cannot love the way they choose to. So a novel serves as a love letter to say, you matter, you're enough, it's perfect the way you are, and yes, you exist. We're here and we're queer, the sort of thing, deal with it. Yeah.
That's really lovely. Yeah, I've definitely, I mean, not to get too much into my own personal life, but I came out fairly late. I was 28. And before that time, I read a lot, and I found literature was something that was really helpful in terms of figuring out my own identity, and sort of maybe understanding queer culture a little bit more before I sort of ventured my way out of the closet. So I think literature absolutely has the power to do that, and I appreciate all of you for writing in your voices and sort of giving that sort of voice for people who maybe are not quite ready to sort of express themselves fully yet. So I think that's amazing, and certainly around the world we have to think about the different cultures and countries that are very oppressive still, and how challenging that is for people. So so that's a great theme to sort of think about, for sure. Did anyone have anything else before I move on to another question? Or oh, Gabriella, we'll get you to unmute.
What about Nathan? You had your...
Actually, it turned out that Kagiso said everything I was going to say about love letters, so we're good.
That's awesome.
First of all, I came out even later than Glenn did at age 31, but I did come out with a bang at that point. And not all my books are lesbian themed. My first book was not. And I think that writing, it's such a deep part of oneself. one's sexuality, that's part of one's identity. It challenges you're challenged by having this this other identity. You are challenged to look deep into yourself. Writing from a lesbian, gay, trans perspective is really, you're really coming out again in your writing. So in one way or another, even if you're not writing about yourself. And I think that's one of the reasons it wasn't my first book. It took me a while to get there. And one of the challenges, though, is to write, is not to make it, if you're writing fiction, not to just make it your own. I don't know. Not all about you necessarily, and that's a real challenge to write the experience, but to fictionalize it so you're getting into another character's point of view, and all those things are especially challenging. Another thing I wanted to say is that being queer is not the only part of our identities. We all have multiple aspects to ourselves, and but it's a very essential part, and pulling everything together is part of your writing. You're writing from your total self. I don't know. That's it for now.
Okay. Now I'm back. Yeah, actually, really all of your answers sort of touch on some other questions that I'm going to have. So hopefully we'll elaborate a little bit more on some of those things. I'm going to read a couple more comments before we get into the next question that are in our chat. Carmen had said, Gabriella, that your French pronunciation made your Montreal story totally believable. So that's great. Outlaw Ottawa says, two very proud queer grandnieces watching, and you are our hero, Gabriella. So that's lovely. Thank you to all the panelists for sharing your stories and your voices. Barb had said, and I know Barb is your partner, a big part of being the partner of a great writer and supporting her at her events is I get to hear other great writers as well. So that's a compliment to all of you. And she thanks me for organizing it, which is my pleasure. So if anyone has any more comments, feel free to bring them to us, and I'll bring them up as we sort of banter back and forth in the panel discussion. So I'm gonna, Gabriella, because we heard from you last, I'm gonna ask the question that you sort of gave to me to ask, because I think that it's interesting, and we'll get, as I say, to some other questions that I think were sort of lightly touched on from people's answer for the first question. So the question is, do you think there is anything of a generation gap between contemporary queer writers and their predecessors in terms of styles, themes, audience? Or does the writing of previous generations dovetail nicely with that of today's? So I'll pass that one particularly to you to start. And then if anyone, of course, has any other thoughts, feel free to jump in.
Wow, I didn't actually want to answer that question. I wanted everybody else to answer it. I have to admit, I'm somewhat out of touch with other generations, so I do want to know more. I think there are huge differences between, at least for those of us who grew up in a Western liberal bubble, that the world has changed. Our world has changed. So when I wrote a coming out story set in the 1960s, that's a different world from coming out today if we're talking about Ottawa. And yet, nevertheless, I get the feeling that it's not all it's not all gone. It's not all easy and gone, and the bad stuff, the negativity isn't all disappeared. We still have a lot to. The new generation has a lot to wrestle with, and maybe in some ways more than we did. In that there's no. I mean, my generation did hide, and I think it's harder to hide now. And it's hard, in a way, it's harder not to be true to yourself, perhaps. In terms of literature, I think there's a challenge for the new generation of writers in that so much has already been said. And you have to, again, in my generation, there weren't that many books written as yet. And so you had a sort of feeling, well, I'm pioneering, whatever. I didn't have that feeling, but I still, but I think the new generation, finding your particular voice may be harder, but that's my question to the rest of you, because I'm sure I'm older than everybody else.
So when I set out to write a YA, I think I had that moment of crisis that a lot of YA authors, well, many YA authors probably have, where you're like, but I'm in my 40s. So I actually reached out to a bunch of GSAs, Gay Straight Alliances, and Saga clubs and Rainbow clubs, and I got to speak to a lot of them. And basically, I walked out of these interactions thinking that the queerlings are all right. They know what they're doing, and they have so much more access to things that we didn't. They have even just the idea of concepts and language that I didn't learn until I was in university. But at the same time, when you're first coming out, that experience is still that fraught experience of being like, oh God, I'm going to tell people who I really am. So I don't know, like every now and then you bump into, is YA done with the coming out story? And there's two sides to that bother me. One, we only ever ask if we're done with something when it's been done a whole bunch from the white perspective. Let's be honest about that. So let's let other cultures and other races have their turn, please. But the other part of it is that our culture, our queer culture, changes so much decade by decade that, my coming out story when I was a 15, 16-year-old and got caught and got kicked out and everything went to hell in a handbasket, the only people who were there for me were the drag queens and the bears. And that was a very different situation than someone coming out today. But there are still kids who come out today and are kicked out. But that's a different world, and that story is still valuable and still important. So I struggle with the idea that we're running out of stories. I think it's more that mainstream publishing has this horrible Highlander effect, where there can be only one. They always seem to introduce people as the next whoever, rather than just making more room at the table for more people. So that's where I come down on the generational gap. I know that we have the individual problem in queerness, and it's funny to have you guys, fellow authors, talking here, because you have queer families with queer other members of your families, which just boggles my mind. Like, I grew up in what I think is the far more common situation where I was the only queer at the table, and that was horrendous. And we don't have an inherited narrative the way a lot of marginalizations do. It's not like we have, I'm saying this to you and it's not quite true, but we don't generally have queer grandparents telling us about our queer parents and our queer aunts and uncles explaining what their queer kids went through, so that we have this foundational knowledge growing up. We don't get it. We are assumed not to be who we are until we say so. And so that isn't changing. And I think because of that, there's always going to be something for the next generation to say.
So I'm gonna throw in the West and the rest perspective. So just to give you an idea, I have two friends. One is a Nigerian author and one is she's Ugandan. She wrote a short story about two girls in love, and it was turned into, her name is Monica Raktinyeko. I'm sure you've heard of the movie Rafiki. And then my friend Jude Dibia, who is a Nigerian author, was the first to write. So Rafiki was banned in Uganda. Monica is 45. Jude is 45, and he was the first man ever, the first writer ever in Nigeria to write a story about a queer man. So in terms of our concerns, I think things have shifted a bit. I think in the West, there's been a lot of literature on queerness, queer history, queer experiences. So the literature is a lot farther ahead. And then I think in Africa, we've been so concerned with post-colonialism, post-colonial thought and all of that. So the West is, I think, just in terms of time and years, is just getting started with post-colonial criticism, and we're just getting started with queer literature. So if a 45-year-old author was the first one to write a novel about a gay man, we can't be talking, in my case, we can't actually be talking about, older generations of queer writers and younger generations. This is just getting started. And there hasn't been a book like this in South Africa about two gay men in love who have this kind of experience of, and there couldn't have been, just in terms of South African history. The experiences are just so different. It's such a different country now. So I say, we didn't have writers like James Baldwin who could write about being queer and write about being Black. That sort of thing just wasn't happening within African literature for a long time. And so we're on fairly new ground at this point. And those of us who are doing this are, we're breaking new ground. We're challenging old rules. Because you just have to start from the very beginning. If you have been concerned with saying, I am African, this is what colonialism has done to us, let's analyze that. And then you're dealing with an extremely difficult thing where you have to say, I assert myself as an African, but I'm also something that is declared publicly, legally in a lot of countries, un-African. So I think one of the biggest challenges for queer Africans is honestly feeling like you are betraying your own people or yourself, or this identity that it has taken generations to establish, this identity of being African and being important and having your voice matter. You feel as if you're being disloyal to all those generations of comrades or fighters who have fought for you to assert yourself as an African. Now you're turning around and doing something that is considered European. How do you explain that? So it's very difficult to kind of to claim yourself as both. So I'm not sure at what point we're gonna get to a place. It's still illegal to be queer. I mean, Such a Lonely Lovely Road won the inaugural Pius Adesami Memorial Award. Pius Adesami was a prof at Carleton who died in that plane crash, the Ethiopian plane crash last year. So this book, just to give you an idea, this book wins an award, the inaugural award. The award is given in Kenya. And they asked me to say something because I wasn't able to travel. And I said, how great it was and everything. And then I also said, it's amazing that this award is being handed out in a country where it's still illegal to love whoever you want. And that part of the speech did not go into the acceptance thing because it's too risky. So it's amazing that a book about two queer men won an award in a country where it's illegal to be queer. But even at the award, it's risky to say that, So that's where we are in literature. It's a very different place from, I think, where Westerners are.
Thank you. I was going to ask actually, how your book was received in South Africa, and you know, I knew that it had won an award, but I was curious about that. So I really appreciate you elaborating that, because I think that's just such a, you know, different perspective than most of us are familiar with. So I think, you know, having your voice and describing that is really important for us. Amanda, did you have anything before I move on?
I mean, well, lots of good things were said. Again, always when I go last, right? Always like, do I have anything useful to add here? I will say that, yeah, so I work, going on what Nathan was saying earlier, like I work globally with a lot of families that have, particularly trans family members, whether they be children, partners, parents, whatever. And the acceptance it really varies widely by country, the amount of literature available, the amount of supports available, the amount of even medical support available. I mean, all of that, access to all of that it varies so widely. So I think there's still a lot more to talk about there. A lot of trans people are still, you know, they're starting to get published, but they're not getting published as much as the rest of the LGBT community. And so that needs to be said as well, right? Like even my book is written by a cis person. And yes, it is written by a cis person with, you know, with the inclusion of the trans family members in it, but it's still not written by a trans person. And so I sort of consider that work a gateway to opening up the space on the floor for more trans voices. What I will say about authoring today and what there's to be said today, a lot of my work personally, I'm a very new author. I was only published last year. It was a lot of it takes place on social media, and there's a whole added element of writing that comes social media spaces where that's relatively new for a lot of people. You're sort of told even if you want to get published, you have to have social media spaces. So I think that adds in sort of, it's like it's extra work. It really is, right? Because you're writing books and then you're also writing about things that sometimes have to do with your books in social media space. It's a very complex thing. Finally, I will say that, yeah, you know, we haven't had a lot of situations where we talk about multi-generational queerness in families. And so, you know, that's something hopefully we're going to see more of, you know, where kids are feeling safer, they're coming out, and maybe they're coming out because other people in their families who are a little bit older have been able to come out as well. And they can write stories that perhaps are more joyful and more accepting and more inclusive from the start. What does it look like? I mean, I think a lot of us who are a little older, who came out later, I came out, I think I was 40 actually when I came out, or 39. And, you know, what would it have looked like if I was able to come out younger? What would my experience be like to be able to just live that life with that acceptance from the get-go? And there needs to be stories like that, so people have roadmaps and they can see, okay, this is what happens when you do accept somebody from the get-go and make room for them to be safe and accepted. This is what happens when you don't. And those stories are still very important, whether they were written 50 years ago or they were written recently because people did not have that acceptance, or wrote stories about people who didn't have that acceptance. So I do think that we still have a ways to go, and I'm excited to see where literature goes with that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thank you again for answering that. I think as I'm seeing in the comments, I think people are appreciating what everybody is saying. AJ says, thank you so much, Kagiso, for sharing your insights. And Maxine says that it's a truly interesting discussion. So I think that means a lot that we're offering the opportunity to have this discussion in this space. So thanks again to Capital Pride for providing that for us. Glenn had written a comment and a question. He said, I loved the thread in each reading of being seen, and how you feel you're being seen within the queer community, or in a relationship, or as you age. For me, navigating through queer spaces, it often makes me re-ask, what identity am I carrying into this space, and what is this space telling me about myself? his question to you all is, how did the process of writing these works disrupt or call out your own notions of about who you thought you were? Because I know some of you write, you know, obviously the not necessarily Amanda, because you're writing your memoir, but other people are writing from the perspective of different characters who are obviously not themselves. So that's an interesting question for sure. If anyone wants to take that.
I think one thing that popped up for me, and I'm gonna call out to someone, Rachel Spangler used this phrase in a panel I saw her give once. I'm a gateway gay. And I use that phrase like I'm the least threatening kind of queer person there is, right? Like I'm just this white dude. I'm tall, but I'm not very threatening. I'm married. We have a dog. We live in suburbs. So I often feel that my role as a queer person has to be to hold the gate open, and to make sure that I'm making room. And you know, it almost feels like in many ways, you know, I have survived queer violence, but at the same time, or anti-queer violence rather, but at the same time, I get past the microphone a lot. So it should be my job to make sure that I'm passing that microphone on somewhere else. So yeah, like even when I'm invited to do things like this, my first question should be, if I'm doing my job correctly, well, who else is speaking? And if it's a panel full of, you know, cis white gay guys, then you don't need me, right? So I feel that's become more, I've been more conscious of that over the past 5 years or so, as I started to realize that that should be my role, and that should be the identity, and the way I'm using my identity is to sort of lift other voices.
That's great. Gabriella, go ahead. You just need to unmute.
What I haven't said before is that, and it's in all my work, is that I write very much from a Jewish identity too. And so, and the question was, what was the writing, what did it tell you about yourself, what the experience of writing the book told you about yourself? And I find it's always a very important thing to to delve into everything that you are, not just one aspect. You know, your book, my book, maybe like my first book was not about a gay theme, but it's I'm looking for the depths of experience, I guess, and there's in our experiences where we're challenged by other, you know, by, let's say, a mainstream, it means we have to search and find a new way of talking about it, to reach to others. So that's one aspect of you know, what I've learned in my writing. Yeah.
Okay, Kagiso or Amanda, did you have anything else to add to that, or?
So I think for me, what I learned was the power of vulnerability. So it wasn't so much about my queerness as it was about, I owned a lot of mistakes that I made, a lot of sort of that ingrained, societally ingrained transphobia, a lot of the, you know, a lot of my misconceptions, you know, and I struggled, and I put all that in the book because I also think that sometimes people look at the LGBTQ plus community as like you know, we're just a blanket. We're all the same, but we're not. You know, and our experience is very widely. We're not a monolith. And just because you're part of the community does not mean that, you know, you don't hold, you know, some beliefs that can be harmful to other parts of the community. And so I had to own a lot of my transphobia in that book. And I also had to own a lot of even my own, homophobia in that book. And so that was really hard to do, but I think that it helped me become a better person. The point of writing the book was always to educate. It was never, to look good. And I don't think that I come across as somebody who's, angelic or, says or does all the right things, certainly. So that was the hopefully teaching people who read the book, showing people who read the book that it's okay to make mistakes, that we can love people and be imperfect in that love. But as long as we're pushing forward and as long as we're trying and we're listening to them and we're letting them lead with their, by telling us who they are and what they need, that's all we can do. So yeah, that was a big part of the process for me.
Great. So I just wanted to acknowledge that that Nathan has not been feeling well. He had suffered a migraine yesterday and is experiencing it again today. So if you're wondering why Nathan is off screen, that's he's sort of just trying to take care of himself. So for anyone who's maybe wondering what happened to Nathan, he's just taking a bit of a break, and hopefully he'll be back. But if he can't be, we certainly understand it, and obviously we really appreciate him taking the opportunity to join us today. I'm just sort of looking at the time. We've got about maybe 10 minutes. So if anyone has any other questions, feel free to bring them up now. I've got quite a few, and I want to ask them all, but I know that I won't be able to get everything. But one I think that maybe is the most important, just based on some of the things we've talked about today, was talking about diversity within the community and intersectionality, something that I think Kagiso and Gabriella in particular spoke about, whether it's queer or trans identity or racial or religious identity, and how that can create, obviously conflict potentially within the community, but also an opportunity to learn about each other. So I'm hoping that those of us who are here and don't have migraines can answer those questions, if you would be so kind.
So just to sort of continue on, and I wanted to add, I didn't find it easy to find my way in the queer community in Ottawa. And I have kind of what feels to me like an intense story. Maybe it isn't an intense story, but to continue on from what we were saying, a friend of mine once said, a poet friend of mine once said that sometimes you write the book and sometimes the book writes you. So you can find that you come out quite changed out of writing a book, and you come out a different person with a different perspective. I'm a YA writer primarily, so I had always written YA literature. And this isn't YA, it's my first adult novel. But when I started, I was married to a woman for 18 years, a very long time. And then I wrote Such a Lonely, Lovely Road. And I find I come out of every book with a completely different view on life and moving through the world very differently. And when I wrote Such a Lonely, Lovely Road, I had a complete breakdown because I was like, I don't know, I don't think I'm a lesbian. And it was very difficult because I was 38 at the time. And I felt like I was, it felt like a betrayal to my identity, the community, like all of these things were happening. And so then how do you like go ahead and promote a queer novel if you are having this whole crisis within yourself? And I think that it changed me as a writer, but it also changed me as a person. And that's always the danger of the long form, as some poets have said, that they're a little bit afraid to go into the long form because you completely go into a different world and it's scary what might come out at the end. But Such a Lonely, Lovely Road completely changed my life. And it was hard. It was extremely hard because I had 2 kids and a partner, a very long-term partner, and we'd been together since our early 20s. And I suddenly was navigating a completely different space, different world. And just such to aspiring writers out there, beware, the long form can change you. But it's been beautiful. It's been a beautiful experience, getting into the lives of these 2 men who were so madly in love. And but what I can say about my experience in the queer community in Ottawa was that I just found it very white and male. That might not be everybody's experience, but I just couldn't find a place in it necessarily. And my partner was Jewish, and she couldn't really find a Jewish community that was queer. But it was just very hard to find home in this city. And just as I said before, it may not be everybody's experience, but it was hard. And I think it's also hard to be an interracial couple on top of all of that, immigrant I am. And yeah, so I think, I love the village. I love that it exists. I know what it has done for the Ottawa queer community, and I really appreciate that. It just isn't a space where I found I didn't find myself mirrored in those spaces.
Yeah, I can very much appreciate that. One thing that I'm a graphic designer by profession, and the banners that you see in the village on Bank Street of the Gabriella is actually featured as one of them. It was because I was doing portraits of community leaders from the past. As you say, it was very white. So I was very conflicted about how to, recognize and honor the people who in the community who built the community really from the ground up in Ottawa, but also recognizing that that was a very mostly white cisgender community. So it's sad to me that those spaces are not yet opening up in Ottawa. I know, as a community, we're still somewhat invisible. It's kind of why I got involved in village activism, was to try and build community, something that was visible and could hopefully encourage the spaces that were already there and build others. I wouldn't say that I was overly successful with that, but it's a challenge in Ottawa. I think we're very in many ways we're politically liberal, but we're socially conservative, and that's a real tough nut to crack. And it sort of makes me sad that I'm hearing that it's still challenging for people to not feel that sort of welcoming space yet, and obviously particularly from people who, like you say, are perhaps immigrants or from different backgrounds and perspectives. So there's lots of work yet to be done. So I did want to raise one quick question here before we wrap up. Holly had asked a question in the Q&A section. She says, first of all, it's wonderful to hear authors read in their own words. She finds it very emotional, and she wondered how it feels to see your words in print. As a queer person, do you feel more vulnerable, and does it get better as you age? Anyone want to take that one?
Maybe I'll have something to say on that one.
Okay.
Well, I'll just speak to it quickly. It meant the world to me. I think that it meant a lot because it wasn't, in a way, because it wasn't just my story, it was my family's story. And I thought, wow, the largest publisher in the world is backing a book about a really queer family, and you know, who's had so many changes and twists and turns, and you know, you know, has come out the other side in this really positive way where we're a happy family, we're a good family. We went on to adopt a fourth child after all of this, right? Like, I mean, it's been a really, really good thing. And, you know, I think that just gave me so much hope for the future, that we're going to get hopefully more and more diverse in the stories that are being told. And also I think that we're going to get to a place where it's just where being queer is hopefully, fingers crossed, so it's normalized. It's so okay, right? And it's just not I look at the new generation, and you know, like Nathan was saying earlier, the queerlings are all right, and I have so much hope. So yeah, it is a vulnerable thing, but it is also a really powerful thing, and it's one of those things that bury me with a copy of my book, because I'm just so glad it's out there.
I think a lot of people can be really glad that it's out there too, because I think, as something you sort of touched on, but maybe I didn't bring up, was, you know, how, you know, relatable it was, but also how educational it was for people to hear that voice and to understand that story, and even just, you know, navigating how to treat people, trans people, with dignity and respect, and you know, there's such a huge learning curve for, obviously, mainstream community, but also within the queer community, in terms of like, how do we, you know, deal with pronouns, and how do we, you know, we're such a like a binary world society. It's, you know, I think we all, you know, even with the best of intentions, I think you bring up some of your personal stories about how, even though you want to do the right thing, sometimes you stumble on in certain ways. So I think your book is really fantastic, and I would recommend it to anybody who wants to learn more about you know, how to you know, whether they know someone who's trans in their family or in their social circle, how to treat people with dignity and respect. So I thank you so much for writing that. One quick comment here before I wrap up, and say, oh, Gabriella, sorry, did you have something you want to say?
Yeah, because I didn't didn't come out earlier. So the new project I'm working on is set in Germany, and then in Berlin in the 1920s and 30s, when there was so really way back in the past, there was quite a flourishing gay and lesbian culture then, and trans. And what I wanted to say is, not to end on a negative note, but it's made me aware how it can all vanish in an instant if we're not careful, and how important our work is in terms, or not just our work, but community work is important in building bridges and getting that message out that who we are and our importance. Our, like the liberation part can vanish so quickly if we're not vigilant, and if we become complacent. So my last comment.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I worry about. I'm glad to hear that the quizlings are all right, or the queerlings are all right. But yeah, it does sort of concern me. You know, as I say, when we talk about safe space, I mean, we're moving so much into a virtual community, and obviously today we're we're virtual because of the pandemic, but that's been a trend that's sort of been happening for a long time, and I didn't get a chance to sort of ask that question today because there were so many amazing points and perspectives being discussed. But you know, maybe another time we'll do another event and we'll delve into some of those questions. So one quick comment here from JJ, who said, he said, thank you for sharing the stories that resonates with this old cis gay male who believes the lessons of life and learning from so many different perspectives. I've always believed that artists are at the forefront of evoking change. So I think that that's absolutely very true. And that's something that, at least certainly in Western culture, you know, the queer community has always sort of been in the forefront of you know, mainstream community copies what what people of color and queer people do within culture. It's like they catch up to how awesome we are. So, and then Sunita says she's happy to meet us. She's eager to read her books, which will tie into me telling you how you can do that. And it will mean more after hearing you talk about them. Bravo, she says. Or brava to the female writers. I'm not from the 2S LGBTQ+ community, but my gay friends and acquaintance are awesome people. More power to y'all, and I want us all to be one community of people without labels, which is a lovely thought. So before we go, I did want to thank again all of our amazing special guests, Kagiso, Gabriella, Nathan, who sadly had to go, and I hope that he's feeling better soon, and obviously Amanda as well, for taking the time to read from your works today. It was really an honor and a pleasure to meet you all. I'm sure everybody, and certainly the comments that we're getting, people were really moved by your stories. So thanks again to Capital Pride and to the Ottawa Senior the Ottawa Senior Pride Network, who helped make today's events possible. So in order to purchase the works, I'm going to share my screen. You can get them at your local bookseller or online through their publisher or website. A special shout out to Perfect Books on Elgin Street, which helped me in order to get everybody's copy of their books to me. So I had a chance to be able to read them before today. And so no shade to Jeff Bezos, but Amazon is making more than enough money. So please buy local where you can. So Kagiso's book, and I'm just gonna share my screen. Okay, here we go. So Kagiso's book, Such a Lonely, Lovely Road. It's published by Mawenzi House, and their website is mawenzihouse.com. Gabriella Goliger's book, Girl Unwrapped, is published by Arsenal Pulp Press, which is Arsenal Pulp, blah, why, what is wrong with me? arsenalpulp.com. Her official website is gabriellagoliger.com. And then Nathan's book of Echoes Born was published by Bold Strokes Books. And you can find that on boldstrokesbooks.com. And his official website is apostrophen.wordpress.com. And Amanda's book, Love Lives Here, A Story of Thriving in a Transgender Family, is published by Viking Penguin Random House, and penguinrandomhouse.ca is their website, and hers is amandajetteknox.com. So that's all the information there. So thanks again to everyone. Really, it was such a pleasure, and yeah, I wish you all happy Pride. Thanks so much.
Happy Pride. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Everyone.
much. It's been such a pleasure.
Oh, thank you.